Hello, students. I hope you had a great weekend. This week, we'll be learning about poverty in the United States. Poverty is such an interesting topic as a social worker. Many of the clients that you will be seeing have lived in poverty, are living in poverty, or will live in poverty. It is very complicated. Not just one simple solution will take somebody out of poverty. There is also not one thing that contributed to an individual living in poverty. It could be simply the parents that a child was born to, or one broken down car, one car accident, or one trip to the doctors. It is very difficult to break the cycle of poverty from generation to generation as well. Poverty exists when a person has inadequate financial resources or means of subsistence to meet basic needs. In the United States, several people live in poverty, but are not granted government subsidies or benefits because they are above the poverty line. Review the web links in this week's module. Put your zip code in to check what poverty is like in your area. How many people in your area live in poverty? What about in your county? I think you will be surprised. Review what the poverty line is for a family of 2 or 4. Is this something that you could live off of? Could you live off of it and be able to save money to get yourself out of poverty, become middle class? When watching the video of children sharing their stories of poverty, listen to their fears and triumphs. Listen to their frustrations and worries. Maybe you have been there. Maybe you are there now. Maybe you will be there in the future. This is what your clients are going to face or are facing. They are the families that you are going to provide resources to. Remember, 1 in 30 children grow up in poverty. And in some areas, it's more. What are the possible solutions to poverty? Increasing jobs, reinstating the Recovery Act fund, and counting SNAP benefits as income. They seem like simple solutions, but of course they're not. And this isn't going to end poverty in general. It's a help, but it's not going to end it. What does poverty look like? It is women, racial and ethnic minorities, high school dropouts, children, LGBTQA community, older adults, and individuals with physical and intellectual disabilities. Poverty doesn't discriminate. Anybody can find themselves there at any time. It is 1 in 7 adults. While you're reading this week and reviewing the web links and the videos, review the difference between the living wage and the poverty line. In most cases, the living wage, or the minimum amount needed to maintain a standard of living that exceeds the poverty line, is not enough. With minimum wage, can individuals make enough to meet their living wage? How much difference is there between the living wage and somebody who's earning minimum wage job? Approximately 40% of all Americans would live in poverty at least one time in their life, or 1 year in their life, and 54% will live in near poverty at some point between the ages of 25 and 60. Most of us will find ourselves between the ages of 25 and 60. By the age of 70, over half of the US citizens will have lived in poverty at some point during their life. That's a large number of individuals. These are the clients that we serve. We need to know how to serve them. Things to think about in the United States. 1% of the US population receives 17.2% of all income. 1% of the US population holds 35.4% of all wealth. The top 10% of the population holds 77% of all wealth. And then the average salary of the top CEOs is 400 times greater than the average American's working salary. So think about that for a minute. The top 10% of the population of the United States holds 77% of the wealth. They also hold the decision making. So think about that. Think about the people who are making the decisions of our social welfare system. Think about how our decisions get made. Are those the individuals living in poverty? Do they know what it's like to not be able to put a house over your head or make the decision if your child goes on a field trip or if there's food on the table? What would happen if everyone had access to health care and not have to pay for it? How would this change the number of individuals living in poverty? Or how many people access health care? We know that people don't go to the doctors when they're sick simply because it's too much money. So then they wait until they get very sick, and the cost of getting healthy again is way more than if they would have gone to the doctor to begin with. Think about how you have to take off time at your job to go to the doctor. You're simply choosing between making your rent payment or being well. Is that fair? Just things to think about as you move through this chapter. If you'd like to know more or find or read an interesting book, Nickeled and Dimed is a great book to read about living in poverty. It follows the author through different jobs of minimum wage and the decisions that the individuals in those jobs have to make. Simply, do they go and clean a house, or do they take their kid to the doctor? Do they work another job or go to and give their kid food that night? Who's taking care of their children? Simple things like that. So what are some causes of poverty? 1, there's individual differences. People that believe that it is the individual's fault that they live in poverty. The individual made poor spending decisions, or they didn't know how to save money, or they just didn't work hard enough. Review how you spend your money in a month. Imagine living on minimum wage. Can you pay all your bills? What would you sacrifice? What would you keep? What would others from the outside say about your decisions? It's hard, right? It's hard to think about giving up that movie or that Friday night with friends, because as much as you want to be able to save, to afford your bills, for your sanity, you also need that social and emotional component from others. So what sacrifices would you make? Also, the social structure. People work, but our jobs do not pay enough to make ends meet. Our safety nets in the United States are not strong enough to keep people out of poverty, and we have no universal health care. As you continue, review the approaches to poverty reduction. Do you think they could work? What is your strategy? What would you implement? What do you think the United States needs to move us out of poverty? As a social worker, how are you going to help your clients make ends meet? What resources can you provide for them? How can individuals save with the way the United States system is set up? You'll hear in the videos that you watch that as soon as they start to save, they no longer get the benefits. They have to live on their own, but when they live on their own, it costs more money than if they were on the benefits. Is there a way out of this cycle? Or is the way our system is set up, it's a vicious cycle to continue on? It's hard. There's not one right or wrong reason. But as you think about this, think about you being a social worker. Think about you working with clients. Think about you working with children. Think about what sacrifice you would make, and then what we're asking of others to make. Really, just keep your judgment to yourself in some ways. We don't know what anybody's going through in any given day. And imagine if you have a child with a disability and their healthcare needs, and how much time it takes to drive back and forth to therapy, would you have enough time to work? So these are just some things to think about as you move through this module. Have a great week.